Hello, everyone. We're going to get started in just a second, just letting the room fill up. Thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight, and get settled. Grab a drink, some tea, some coffee, whatever suits you.
So Matt, you know that I'm a consummate professional, and so I have not had I've not drunk anything in the past several hours, no liquids at all, so that there will be no risk of interruptions. But on the way down, I did pour myself this.
Oh,
and so
nice.
it's there, it's waiting for me. Yeah. But we're so there's going to come a moment, and I don't know when. It might be at the very end, it might be in the middle, but there's going to be a clear pivot where I pick that up.
I feel like eventually you'll hit a question that you don't want to answer, and you should just slowly drink that whole mug. And then I'll just ask you another question.
That'll be our signal. And what's great is that we established it before anyone was here.
Yes, right. It's good not to do it in front of the audience so they don't know what's happening, you know? It's good.
Oh my gosh. Okay, on that note, we're going to get started. Hello, and welcome back to our Authors on Tap reading series. I'm Javier Ramirez, and along with Kristen Gilbert, run Exile and Bookbill here in the historic Fine Arts Building on Michigan Avenue in downtown Chicago. Tonight, you all are in for a treat, as we are lucky enough to host Mike Meginnis in celebration of his new novel, Drowning Practice. Congratulations, Mike. Just came out Tuesday. As if that weren't enough, Exile All-Star Matt Bell will be peppering him with questions, comments, and queries tonight. As always, we thank you all for tuning in and highly suggest that you keep your cameras on for the event, but please mute yourselves during the conversation between Mike and Matt. By the way, it's never too early to gift shop for the holidays, so make sure you purchase signed copies of both Drowning Practice and Refuse to Be Done: How to Write and Rewrite a Novel in 3 Drafts through the link in the chat. Let's meet our guests and get the show on the road. Mike Meginnis is the author of Fat Man and Little Boy. His fiction has appeared in the Best American Short Stories, 2012, Unstuck, The Collagist, PANK, Hayden's Ferry Review, and many other outlets. He lives and works in Iowa City. Mike, I have to say, the blurbs on the jacket are no joke. Not only do they include Matt Bell, but also 2 of my favorite weird and wonderful writers, Lindsay Hunter, who is a fellow Chicagoan, and J. Robert Lennon, who wrote one of my favorite books last year. Lots of buzz surrounding Drowning Practice, for sure. Congratulations again.
Thank you.
Mike will be in conversation with Matt Bell, who is the author of the novels Appleseed, Scrapper, and In the House Upon the Dirt Between the Lake and the Woods, as well as a short story collection, A Tree or a Person or a Wall, and several other titles. His writing has appeared in the New York Times, Tin House, Conjunctions, Fairy Tale Review, American Short Fiction, and many other publications. A native of Michigan, he teaches creative writing at Arizona State University. If you have any questions or comments, please type them into the chat, or if you're feeling brave, use the raise hand function and Matt will be happy to call on you. So please welcome Mike Meginnis, Matt Bell. Have a great show, you guys.
Thank you, Javier. Mike, it's so good to see you. How are you doing?
It's good to see you. I'm doing well. It's, I'm like, it's the really stressful period was everything leading up to Tuesday, and then it happens, and now like my body releases about 2 to 7 years of stress, right? So like I always compare it to the feeling of like having a long swim. That's where my body is right now, is like I've been swimming for many years. I guess not drowning. I suppose that's thematic. And now I get to just sort of like lay down. I've washed up on the beach, and live or die, I'm at least not swimming anymore.
Right. I always feel like the same thing, like it's anxiety up to the book release. My first novel came out, I had like an eye twitch that no one could see, but like I couldn't sleep because my eye was twitching so bad for like 2 months. And the book came out, I was like, oh, I'm good. Like just like weirdly super calm. Well, thanks so much to everybody for being here and for joining us. Thanks to Exile and Bookbill for hosting us. Been lucky to be in conversation with a lot of writers here during the pandemic and hopefully as we're moving out of it. So I'm glad to get to continue that with Mike. What I usually do here is I'll say a couple of nice things about the book to try to make Mike embarrassed before we begin. Things that are, of course, true. I will ask a couple of questions. Mike will read. We'll have a little more conversation, and there'll be room for your questions as well. I think one of the things that can be fun in this format is for you to use the chat throughout the time. Obviously, Mike and I can't see all of you, but we're really glad you're here. And if you hear something you like, or you're interested in something, or Mike reads a line you really like, feel free to just cheer and be excited in the chat. Feel free to introduce yourself, say where you're from. The way we sort of all feel like we're in community as we would be in person. Okay. I've been a fan of Mike's writing for really as long as I can remember. I was trying to remember when I read the first thing of his that I did, but I really don't know anymore. I think long before either of us had published a book, but we were reading each other and in conversation. His short story, Navigators, was published 11 years ago in Hobart and anthologized in the next year's Best American Short Stories. Is still one of my favorite short stories, a story I teach whenever I can. A student of mine just this week said it was one of his top 3 short stories of all time, which is just really nice to be around. Mike's first novel, Fat Man and Little Boy, is an incredibly ambitious achievement, a book whose conception and scope I was deeply jealous of. And now we have his Drowning Practice, which is one of the best 2022 novels I've read so far, and a book I know I'll be thinking about for a long time. There are so many apocalyptic novels, but there are very few as tender and as open-hearted as Drowning Practice. It's a smart novel and a weird novel. It's well plotted and it's full of beautiful language, which is a harder combination, I think, than many of us appreciate. It builds into and toward mystery, ending in a place that, for my money, is even more strange than its opening dream of the end of the world, a vision shared by everyone on Earth and seemingly accepted by almost all. In the novel, the dream comes in January, but here we are in March holding Mike's novel. And so November is even closer for us than it is for Mott and Lyd and David and the rest of the book's characters, which means I hope we will all pick up the book and get reading while there's time. It'll probably embarrass Mike to say this too, but before I get him talking, I also want to say that Mike is one of the sweetest, kindest people I know, a community builder, an activist, a good friend, and a good partner. I feel really lucky to have known him as long as I have, and I'm glad that this new book will bring his fiction and his person to more people. Hi, Mike, again.
Hi, you promised to embarrass me, and it worked. There's a story Tracy likes to tell about me, my partner, for those who are not familiar, where someone was complimenting me in undergrad, just like somebody that I worked for, I believe, was just saying something basic and nice about me, and I left the room while it was happening. I don't remember that, but I do believe that it happened. And I was like, I was almost at the pivot point. I was like, I don't know, we might already be here.
Time.
Yeah. But we'll keep the suspense building. Thank you so much.
Good. Good. Yeah, it's good to have something to build toward.
Yeah.
Could I get you to tell us a little bit more about Drowning Practice? I feel like I'd like to hear how you describe the book and how you sort of talk about it. And I also love to hear just like where this novel began for you, like where it came from.
Yeah. So the idea here is that some point in, I think it's January 9th, everybody has a dream. Everybody in the world has a dream that the world is going to end in November. They don't know why, they don't know how, but they do know that it's probably going to happen. And because the dream is unanimous, most people, when they wake up the next day, they say, you know what, this is probably real. And they're not sure what to do with themselves. Life becomes a lot like it is now, but it's more obvious that it's kind of hollow in a lot of ways, right? And so people are sleeping through their days, they're doing their jobs even more listlessly than before. The protagonists are a mother and daughter named Lyd and Mott. Lyd is a once moderately successful novelist who has not written a book in years and is now sort of an agoraphobe. And her daughter Mott is a really precocious, intelligent 13-year-old girl who admires her mother a whole lot and wants to write a book before the world ends. And so they make the decision that that's going to happen. But in order to have time to write the book, they need to flee across the country because they're being chased by Lyd's ex-husband and Mott's father, David, who is a weirdo and a creep who he says he's a spy, and the evidence does seem to suggest that's true. It's strange though. So they're running from him and they're trying to get that book written before the world ends. As far as how I came up with the idea, it involved years and years of consecutive failure and depression. So like I was so desperate to come up with something that I could write. I kept trying. I'm sure you've been through this cycle. Like I would write 20,000 words and I'd be like, this is no good. And then I'd write 20,000 words and I'd be like, this is no good. But I would keep like finding little things that I liked and I wanted to keep. And so, for example, there was one that I wrote like 10,000 words of that was going to be my like straight up science fiction novel, which I've never done before. And it was about a spaceship that was also going to be the mother of a new terraformed Earth. The spaceship was going to set down on some planet somewhere. It was going to give birth to all the life that was formerly on Earth and terraform the planet. And the daughter, there was a human daughter of this spaceship that was named Mott, who loved the spaceship very much and lived inside it, and it was flying across space. Now, you may have noticed the problem with this, which is that I've just described a spaceship flying through space and a daughter in the space. There's no drama at all there.
Right.
There's no
Right.
other characters. But I kept making mistakes like that until eventually I got so I had other reasons I was frustrated too. I've just like I've had some real issues with depression over the last 10 years or so that are fortunately a lot better now. But I was so desperate to start writing something that I was literally just saying ideas for books to Tracy in this basement that I'm in now.
Right.
And I finally said, what if there was a little girl who wanted to write a book before the world ended? Because her mom wrote one and she wanted to be like her mom. And I said that and I was like, oh, that's actually really sad. And I decided to do that. And then all the rest of it came from that.
Yeah, I mean, there's actually like a real clarity to that pitch, right? Like it is like a really, like you can sort of see the relationships are already there, right? The want is already there. Like you really are starting with like a ton of material when you start from that place, which seems really exciting. One of the things that seems challenging about a lot of apocalyptic novels is that like the apocalypse has either already happened, right? It's sort of in the past, and you're living kind of post-apocalyptic, or you have the kind of apocalypses we have like in our life, I think, where things feel open-ended and like something like climate change is like happening and going to happen and worsen, but like on this like indeterminate long clock. And I was trying to think as I was rereading today about like two parts of your apocalypse. Like one is like everybody has the same information. We live in this sort of era of propaganda and misinformation and heads in our sands and like our heads in the sand. And then here it's like everybody has the same dream. It's pretty much agreed upon. Almost everybody agrees it's happening. And there's this very definite date where the thing that's going to happen is going to happen. And I wondered, is this an easier apocalypse to deal with because it has like a start and end date? Does it allow for clear action? Like even the idea of like Lyd and Ma overturning their life, there's like an expiration date, right? Like if I abandoned my life to do something tomorrow, the world would still be going on when I got done with whatever I was trying to do, right? I don't know. What do you think? How does that factor in? Does it change how we respond to apocalypse?
Yeah, I mean, I think that like in a lot of ways, this premise was about heightening the drama of the situation that we all already are obviously in, right? Like it is already the case that everybody needs to decide what they're going to do before they die. They don't usually have a really acute sense of exactly when that's going to happen or how or whatever, but we do know that we're going to die, and we don't usually behave as if we knew that. So part of it is just kind of like me being a goth boy and just a memento moriing at everybody, so that the book is a little more dramatic version of kind of what I think is just the story of life generally, which is like, here's what you got to work with, here's your situation, can you do anything with it that's going to feel like not a waste, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it was partly that. I think in terms of like how I would compare this to other apocalypses, I think that the post-apocalypse is almost like it's a common genre, but it's sort of a fake idea. I'm almost like quoting a thing from Appleseed, I feel like, when I say this, like that the world, if the world is over, we don't we're not there, right? Like us being there means it hasn't ended. It just means it's changing and we're struggling with it. And so like for me to write about the sort of unimaginable, vast strangeness of the apocalypse means we can't see it until as late as possible, because once we see it, it's not the apocalypse. It's just the next thing that happens. So I think that was part of why that was like dramatically where I wanted to be too.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. It does seem like the clock of it seems really useful. I saw Ben Winters, reviewed your book for the New York Times. One of the things I thought was interesting about that was like The Last Policeman has a similar clock, right? Like the world is going to end in this very definite time, and that character sets up to solve like a murder that doesn't matter because the world's going to end. And your characters are writing a novel that doesn't matter to the public or something because no one will ever read it, right? It won't be published in that way. But it matters to the person writing it as it mattered to Ben's character trying to solve that crime. Isn't interesting the way that sort of functions. Can I get you to read some of it for us? I'd love to sort of hear from it. It's launch week, so most people in the audience probably haven't read it. And I'm sure they'd love to get to hear a little of the prose.
Well, yes, in fact, I happen to have it right here. So I'm just going to read I'm going to read a few pages from the beginning.
Great.
This chapter is called May Mott. Not everyone believed the world would end that year. There remained a few optimists, agnostics, and well-meaning liars who claimed it might endure at least a few months longer, possibly even forever. Until this question was settled, however, there would be little point in spending good money to repair or replace what was broken or used up, and least of all, what benefited children, who would probably never repay such investments. Public schools stopped buying supplies. In the unlikely event that the dream about November proved wrong, they would resume their purchases in December. Taxpayers would thank them for running a surplus. Maud attended a public middle school for reasons both financial and political, according to her mother, and though some dedicated educators now paid for necessities out of pocket, Mott's teacher was not one of these. Miss Rooney attended class each day dressed more or less for the part, but she rarely spoke and often took naps on her desk. Her classroom was down to its last stubs of chalk. Among the dozen long fluorescent ceiling lights that lit the children, 3 always flickered and 1 was entirely spent. These bulbs would never be replaced. Erica Bannock stood in front of the class, a piece of yellow note paper stretched taut in her hands. It would tear if she pulled any harder. Her knees were covered in Band-Aids. They were shaking, and so was her voice. What I think will happen in November. That's the name of my report. I think that everything will be okay. When you hear the end of the world, you think about everyone dying. You can't help it. That's how you grew up, but there's another way to think. November might only mean the end of the world as we know it. Would that be so bad? Most people suffer for most of their lives. Most people live in India or China. If everything was different, some things would be better. Maybe in the new world, no one will be hungry. Maybe we'll learn to be nice. In conclusion, I think that's what will happen. Thank you for your time. A student in the front row raised his hand. Erica pointed at him, which meant that he could ask. What happened to your eye? Erica tore her paper in half. She didn't mean to do it. She only pulled a little harder. When you see a black eye, she said, you think of someone being hit by her father. You can't help it. But my father is a doctor and a good man. He delivered me himself. She gave the halves of her report to Mott and went back to her seat. The children looked to Miss Rooney. Her head lay on her desk and she was covering her ears. I'll go next, said Molly Coryell. She walked to the front of the class. What I think will happen in November. Everyone will fall down at the same time. If you're in the grocery store, you'll fall down in the fruits and veggies. If you're at your job, your face will fall down on your keyboard and spell a weird word. If you're at home in your bed, you won't fall down, but you won't get up either. Everyone will make a little surprised sound, like they just checked their mailbox, and inside there was a letter from their friend. No one had any questions for Molly. She gave her paper to Mott and sat down. Miss Rooney sobbed once. I'll go, said Malik Boyd. He drew a cloud on one end of the chalkboard and on the other end, a flame. You already know what's going to happen in November. The dream was very clear. There's going to be a flood like the one in the Bible. We'll drown to death. which is supposed to be a pretty decent way to die, at least compared to all the other ways. And then we'll have to choose the cloud or the flame. My granddad died from liver failure last year. His car is still parked in our driveway. I worry all the time that it's going to be stolen. The doors are unlocked, but nobody takes it. Malik didn't wait for questions. He erased what he'd drawn on the board and handed his paper to Mott. It was her turn. She always preferred to go last. What I Think Will Happen in November by Mott Gable. I've asked myself 1,000 times. We all had the same dream, or close enough to the same, and we all know what the father said. The world will be over, forgotten, or maybe it's better to say never remembered again. My first memory is I am sitting on a checkered blanket in the park. My mother is scooping potato salad onto my father's plate. He keeps telling her, "A little more, please." Soon there's more on his plate than there is in the bowl. She's trying not to laugh. He keeps telling her, "A little more, please. Just a little more and I'll be satisfied." Finally, she can't hold in the laughter. He says, "A little more." All of the potato salad is on his paper plate and my mother is dying from laughter. Someone's blue Frisbee settles on our blanket. No one ever came to claim it, so I still have the Frisbee, and that's how I know my memory is true. Becoming a person doesn't happen to you all at once. It takes months or maybe years to learn your name, and then you have to remember it every day. The world has to do the same thing. It's lucky that when we're asleep, when we've forgotten we're a world, Australia's awake to remember. They keep us alive. When November comes and the world is what it is, we'll all forget our names together. Our bodies will still exist, but we won't use them anymore. They'll use themselves.
Thank you so much, Mike. That's always the weirdest thing where I know you're reading to one person. It's like, where is the applause that should be here? But I know people are clapping in their homes and are feeling as excited as I am about this. I really love the opening of this novel. And that line about, "Oh, there's some little clapping icons. Thank you, friends." Like, yeah, you, Steve and Elizabeth. I think that even just that really part right at the beginning where it's talking about like not buying school supplies, not replacing the light bulbs, and this like these children will never replace the resources spent to them at the end of the world. Like it's just so gutting and realistic and feels right. I was thinking as you were reading this about like character agency, you know, and that one of the things that's odd about writing about young people is like you have to find a way often to like give them agency in the story, because most of us, you know, you have to do what your teacher says, you have to do what your parents say. And Mott has like two places where that's happening, right? One is like the teacher is checked out, so Mott kind of takes charge of the class and makes it what she wants of it, and is giving the kids assignments and these essays to write. What will happen in November? She assigns them a book report, right? Like if you could read one book before November, what would it be, right? It's just kind of turning like their life into a thought problem. And then she has her mother who is present and very present in her life, but also is depressive and has her own stuff going on. And there's sort of a thing there. I don't know. I was wondering if you could just talk about how you were thinking about that, how you were making space for Mott to have like her adventure in this world.
I wish I knew the first writer I read who gave me this thought. I wish I could give credit, but I realized at some point that the most important thing you could do for a protagonist in any story was to make them like totally unreasonable and make them just like whatever they do, no matter how much sense it makes, it has to be the most important thing in the world to them in that moment, and they have to be willing to be incredibly rude to everybody around them to make that happen. And so I would do things, some of which are no longer in the story, to force myself to like accept that was the situation with her. So later she decides that she's not going to go to this school anymore because they put her in a weird sort of detention, and she leaves the class, and as she's leaving the class she just knocks over her desk, just knocks it on the ground, which is like a crazy thing to do, but it's like that's what protagonists need to be like. And in earlier drafts of this book, she was doing that all over the place. Every time I could get her to knock a chair over or something like that, I would have her do it, just these petty little rebellions. There's another one that did stay in where she pees in the school's toilet, but she doesn't flush because she wants to punish the school for rejecting her. And so like, I mean, part of it too is like, if a character is petty enough and if they're angry enough, then their agency can be really small and still really important, right? Like I wish I could come up with an immediate example. That the only thing that comes to mind is this detail from the Haunting of Hill House, which I've been told I'm misremembering. I've been told that I made this up, but I believe it's there and I haven't checked. My memory is that the protagonist, who is just a total depressive mess and is, I think, living with her mother. Maybe I'm making that up too. She wants her life to end sooner, and so she sleeps on the left side of her body in order to stress her heart out more so that she'll die sooner, which is like, that's classic finding agency where there is none, right? So I think like looking for those sorts of moments where the character can just get invested in a thing that wouldn't matter at all to them if they were not ready to be protagonists. I think that helps a lot too. So like, if the kid is angry enough and the kid is selfish enough in the way that protagonists tend to need to be, you almost don't have to solve that problem. They'll find ways to solve it for you by just being intractable and horrible to the people around them.
I love that sort of like just claiming of yourself as the center of a story, right? Which is so opposite the way we're asked to behave in real life. You know, it seems like so much of what gets in the way of my own fiction and my students' fiction is like an inability to make characters like act out, or like, you know, like Charles Baxter talks about, like make a scene the way that you were told not to make a scene, right? So you do the opposite of that, and that seems really enjoyable. Mott's a really great character. I mean, I just like kind of immediately loved her from this first part you read, and you know, she's sweet and she's smart and she's fierce and she's awkward and kind of like self-obsessed, as you said, precocious, still definitely a kid. So after reading Little Women as part of this assignment she's given the class, right, she decides that she's going to write a novel, as you mentioned. And her mother, Lyd, who's written three, Lyd's third novel is called Failure, which is, I think, the most hilarious thing. So her mother tries to talk her out of it. And then Mott says, and I'm just going to read this back to you. You don't want to talk about writing a book because you don't think I have time before November, or you think it will be terrible and I'll die disappointed. Books make you feel bad, so you think they'll be the same for me. But when I was small, you thought that maybe I was stupid. You made me see specialists. I could have been enriching myself with cultural activities and reading biographies of historically important women, but instead I took remedial tests with flashcards that said kitten and triangle. Now you admit that you were wrong, that I'm the smartest girl in my class, maybe even my school. And then Lyd immediately corrects her and says, well, I didn't say you were the smartest kid in your class or school. Lyd's sort of like precision, right? So Lyd and Mott are both novelists, right? Lyd's published 3, Mott's writing 1. And I was just wondering, what of your own sort of experience as a novelist you might have seeded each character? Not in a like, we want to read Mike Meginnis through this novel, but I feel like it's impossible to read like Lyd's emails to her editor and not feel like I too am a person who's written a novel that I wish had gone differently.
Yeah, I mean, writing those emails to the editor, I did have this like terrible premonition that I was going to be sending the same emails. You know?
Just copy and paste out of the novel.
And like, you know, you're right that there's that prickliness of like, of course you don't want people to just read you into the book, but at the same time, like, I'd be naive if I weren't like, I'm playing with that intentionally, right? Like, you have to know when you're writing about writers that you're giving readers an invitation to think about that, and that's part of the fun. That's part of the game between you and the readers, like the sort of wink back and forth. So like, there's a lot of jokes about Lyd's career and her frustration, and like some of it is stuff that I felt, and other things are things that I expected to happen or expect to happen to me someday. so there's a thing in there about the, you know, she was in hardback originally when she was published for the first couple times, and that's a little more prestigious, you know, that's a little more a little more market friendly. And then for the third book, they transitioned her down. Yes, they transitioned her down to paperback original, which is of course what my first book was. When I was writing it, that's what I expected this book to be too, right? I just assumed that'd be the path. So like, I thought I was making a funny little joke at my own expense there. I described like things about the cover that I suspected would make it into real covers, and I actually did get one of them in that no one will ever know about. Like the designer doesn't know she did this for me, but it was a lot of fun for me. But she's where the exhaustion and the cynicism and the desperation go to live, right? Like fundamentally, she is the expression of that feeling of horror that I have sometimes when I feel like maybe I'm not going to write anything again, right? Maybe this is the last one. And like that moment will come, and I think the fantasy for me, I don't know about for you, the fantasy for me is that I will not know when that day comes. I'll just keep writing, and then I'll be dead. And like, I won't notice because I'm dead that I didn't finish the book. But like, I'm terrified of that. And then for me, Mott is like, she's closer to the relationship that I have with books when it's relatively healthy, which is on the one hand, I think they're really important to me, and I get really excited about them, and I want to write a great one. But like, even then, because it's important, it's still kind of miserable, right? Like there's still that, like, you're sitting there, like, I think most of all because it's not important, right? Like you sit there and it feels like the most important thing to you in the world. And I don't know if you'll remember this, Matt, but I told, before this book came out, you kindly had me visit your class. This book was out on submission, I think around then. It was working up to it. And I told your students, you know, if I stopped writing tomorrow, nobody would follow up on it. Nobody would ask me to do it. So you have to be motivated in yourself. You have to be interested in it in yourself, and you have to be satisfied with whatever your personal relationship is to it, because you can't count on anybody else's relationship to it to sustain you. And I think a lot of the book is like Mott learning that lesson. And what's frustrating, of course, is that she expects to die right after learning that lesson. Right. So it feels a little hopeless, but you know, it can feel that way writing too.
Yeah, I think that sounds absolutely right. Thinking about just the like the both, like, you're writing this for the pleasure of itself, and then also that sort of like desperate sort of twinge of like, please recognize that I've done this thing or tried to do this thing, or you know, and sort of I hate being in contact with my own desperation, right? Like that's like one of the worst feelings kind of on earth. Yeah, it's sort of awful. One of the things I love is that, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mike, if you're gonna say something.
No, I was just laughing at our shared pain.
Yes. No, I was like, I'm going to turn this back around on you so I can stop talking about it. Maybe this is, I'll ask one more question about novel writing, and then we'll talk about some other parts of the book. But there's a point deep in the novel where and I'm going to sort of muddy the pronouns a little bit, so it's not clear who it's about. But a character says or thinks, or the book thinks, would they ever write another novel? Was that something good people did? And I laughed aloud at that line. And it's sort of perfectly placed. It creates this tonal jolt at this right point, at a moment of high emotion. But I also wondered a little bit if this was like an actual question for you. Like, is writing novels something good people do? Or does there have to be something wrong with you to write a novel?
Yeah, it is very much a question to myself. I connect this to, like, there's a part relatively early on in the book where they're in the grocery store, and there's just like a bunch of stuff missing because like the whole like supply chain is broken down, some factories are not working, etc. And so I think it's Mott asks Lyd, I forget which one asks it, but the question is like, the question is why would you go to the Cheerio factory? Why would you show up for work if your job was to make Cheerios? Which is like, on the one hand, like, I think it's an important question to ask, because it sucks to assume that people want to work in terrible conditions to produce like food for me to chow down on that isn't even like that important to my life. On the other hand, I am buying the Cheerios. Right. So it's really shitty and condescending for me to sit here and say that that's a bad thing to do with your life, because if they didn't do that with their life, I wouldn't be able to buy it. Right. So like, I feel this intense ambivalence about, like, on the one hand, I can't imagine doing anything with my life other than trying to make like art that I find really satisfying and exciting. And I don't know how people get by not writing novels, but that's a deranged thing to believe. It's a crazy thing that I believe. And it, like, I do, but I feel terrible about myself for it. And like, I can kind of let myself off the hook by saying like, well, everybody has their own like weird thing that they're like that about, their thing that they can't imagine living up. But I don't think that's even true,
Right.
right? Like, I don't think,
Agreed. Yeah.
I don't think that most people are like, my life is empty unless I wake up and I play the banjo for 3 hours. So like, I don't know, right? Because like, and I mean, I'm always really fascinated by like the really weird, special moral universe that is created by a book and that exists within a book. Because within a book, you've gone out and you've purchased the book, you've sat down and spent your time with it. You're presumably a person who spent time with books before. They're important to you, they're valuable to you. So when you're reading a book, I think it's almost beyond question that books are special and important, right?
Right.
But I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know that that's true. So I don't think that I come to the book at the end and I have an answer, except that I did write it, right? Like I did, for all my questions about whether this is a good use of my time or anybody's time and resources, and whether I should be like going out there and doing something that would have much more tangible effects on other lives.
Right.
I'm not doing them. So right or wrong, that's where we're at.
Yes. I think I have a really similar sort of feeling about it. I think sometimes that, asked to talk about like writing or reading or what's the importance of it, I think about for myself, like a day that I write or a day I'm reading a good book, like I feel more like myself, and when I don't write or don't read, I start feeling very like thin, like as a person. Like I feel like I even have trouble like feeling all of my emotions if I'm not reading or writing. But I'm like, but that sounds like something's wrong with me. Like if I don't read enough novels or listen to enough music, like I don't have an emotional range. And then I'm like, oh, maybe other people are just like having emotions on their own.
Yes. It's hard to imagine. It's not how I've chosen to live my life, but the evidence suggests that there are many people out there that function without the help of a book.
Right. Or they read a book a year and then they're like, I'm good. I got what literature does for you. And I'm like, oh no,
Right.
I had to desperately read all those books. Well, good. We should probably not think too hard about that. That seems really sort of bad for us. Maybe this is an odd question, but I think it's sort of related. But you're involved in your politics locally and in other ways, and I really do think of you as a community builder in a lot of ways. And one of the things that the drowning practice seems to be about is community, both like the chosen communities, found families, and things we make as we move through life. But then I was also thinking about the way that giving everyone on earth a shared experience in this like November 1st dream makes them a community of shared experience in a certain way. It made me think of just the title of Alfonso Lingis's book. I don't know if you know his work at all, but Flossery has a book called The Community of People with Nothing in Common, right? And like I feel like you've made one of those communities with this dream, and then Mott and Lyd and to some extent David go like out into it. And I was just wondering about how you were approaching sort of community in this book, or how you were thinking about it in a fictional way. We live in such an individualistic narrative form, right? And then sort of write about community is a different move.
Yeah, that's such a great question, because I have like 3 answers that I want to give. So like the first thing that comes to mind is like part of the reason for that is that this book is written partly in response to and as almost a parody of the sort of popular apocalyptic fiction genre. So your Walking Dead's, your Last of Us's, etc. And the format for those shows, for those comics, for those books, when they're books, is generally that like at the beginning of a storyline, they'll try establishing a new community, a new place. So like in The Walking Dead, they have the season that's in the farm, and then they go to the prison. And at every turn, the question that they're going to answer if you've watched 2 of these is, why was this doomed to fail from the start?
Right.
Why could this never possibly have worked? Which is like both a dramatically compelling thing, and it's like, that's just kind of how tragedy works, right? But on the other hand, I find it really infuriating and kind of offensive. Because like usually the reason, even within those stories, that it could never have worked is that there was some asshole in there that just insisted that it couldn't work, right? And like 8 really specific things went wrong that didn't have to go wrong. And so like there's an element of that in this book too. They definitely go from sort of community to community location, and like none of them do totally work out. But I think I never thought about it quite this way before, but I think part of what I was thinking about there was like, that seems like the characters being determined not to have community. That doesn't feel like it's an inherent quality of community. And so I think I was bringing that perspective to it a little bit. Another thing that makes me think about that I couldn't have known when I was writing this, but it changes my relationship to it as the book comes out. So the principal writing on the first draft of this is very different from the first draft, but all the real substantial writing happened before COVID, and in fact was done. The first draft was done before Trump. So like in 2015, I had a version of this book. It wasn't as good as what we've got now, but it existed. And I think a lot of people naturally assume that this was sort of written in response to COVID, which like has advantages and disadvantages, right? I think people are maybe in a phase of curiosity about that, where they're not sure if they want to read that or not. But I remember, like, as soon as the pandemic started, it took like a month. People were immediately forbidding us from writing about this experience. They were immediately saying, you're not allowed to write a COVID book. You can't do that. And they would make these comparisons like, well, 9/11, after that happened, people took several years to write the first book. So like, don't even, you got to wait and consider before you get it, because we haven't even figured out what it meant yet. And like, I find this really upsets me because of what you were just talking about. There are so few universally shared experiences among people on this planet, and we have one, and like, it's not a great one, but the idea that like a few people get to write the definitive version about this and then everybody else is supposed to shut up, it just makes me so angry. And to me, like, I'm really sad about the way that we've responded to the pandemic in a lot of ways, but one of the biggest ones for me is that there was an opportunity to understand ourselves as a community in a way that we usually don't get to. And we actually did, in some small ways, rise to that occasion, right? There were moments where that happened, where we sent money to people so they could stay home, where we, some folks got to work from home. I got to work from home because I have a relatively comfortable white collar job. Obviously, tons of people didn't get to do that. But there were efforts, but we didn't stick with them, and we're not sticking with them now. And it's not that I think I don't think that the pandemic is exactly the same now as it was at the beginning, but yeah, it's just infuriating that we haven't used this opportunity in that way as much as we could have. And obviously, again, I did not know that would happen when I was writing the book, but it has changed the book for me as we've moved through it, where like, there was a moment where when the pandemic started, this is a really ghoulish thing, Matt, but I'm sure you'll know what I'm talking about. There was a part of me that was like, this is very different from my apocalypse. That is not convenient commercially. Yes. This is going to really undermine me. And then later I was like, actually, no, this is the same. It's the same thing. And then I was depressed about that because I didn't want to be right about the things. I wrote this in a deep state of depression. Like I said, I was miserable, and I don't like that I was right about the things I was right about when I felt that way.
Yeah, I think there's I'll say really briefly before I respond to Mike that we're in the last like 15 minutes, and if people have questions, want to put them in the chat, this is like a great time. Javier is telling you the same thing in the chat. Like, this is a fantastic time for that. And if you would rather just like raise your hand and come on video or something, that's fine too. Otherwise, I'm happy to read your questions. I think there's something very bizarre about writing toward your culture and into your culture, and writing about things that are sort of large scale issues, where it would be great to have your book come out and be irrelevant, right? It's sort of like, what an amazing thing to be wrong when your book comes out, and just and sort of like, well, thanks for solving that while I was working on my novel. Which maybe goes back to our necessity question, right? Like, you're writing a novel my novel about climate change. By the time it takes me 5 years to get done, it was like, oh, cool, climate change got fixed. So I was working on that. Well, awesome. And unfortunately, that's just not the case for the most part. But it does seem interesting the way you're read through the current lens, no matter when you wrote the book. Like, if it takes 5 years to write a novel, it took you first draft, you finished in 2015, something
somewhere
like that,
in 2014 or 2015.
So you're looking at 7, 8, 9 years, and you're always sort of read as if you did it like the day the book comes out,
Yeah.
like you were thinking about this and you wrote this whole book that day, which is an interesting thing. Claire has a question in the chat, so maybe I will ask you about this. Did you know your ending, or did it reveal itself to you as you wrote toward it?
I definitely had sort of a trust fall thing going on where at the beginning I was like, well, this premise is interesting enough that if I just keep writing it, at some point something is going to happen in the book that tells me what the ending is going to be. And I always try to have endings that are really just a complete, just at a strange angle to the rest of the book, right? I always want it to, the ideal for me is that you say, yes, this makes sense, but if I had to explain to somebody else why, that would be a real challenge for me. You just kind of have to go through the book to get to it. So I was just sort of waiting for months, maybe the first year of writing, I'm not sure. And I remember the moment where I figured it out. I was with Tracy. I was walking around downtown with Tracy, and so I live in Iowa City, and I remember there are these like brass, I think they're probably not brass. I don't know what they are, but they're in the sidewalk, and they're like depictions of you've been there, so you probably kind of I don't know what they like, balloons or like different, there's some people, there's quotes, and I don't remember which one I was walking over, but I remember like stepping over one around the same time I had the thought, could I set the ending in the place where I said it, which I won't spoil. And it was a strange place to put it, and it was a strange emotional logic that would get me there, but I was so excited by that feeling that I wanted to capture, and by the challenge of getting from where I was to where that was, because there was no connection between the two in a literal sense right then at that moment in the drafting. And then of course in the revision, you find ways to bend toward it, right? You find little hints to put in and things to make it feel like that was the plan. But I really did just kind of have to wait and trust that it would come. I'm reading your Refuse to Be Done right now. I'm only in the first part, but like I feel like I just kind of gave a lot of your advice of like, you find the part that gets you writing and then trust that the resources are going to be in there for the rest of it. And I also want to, I don't know if maybe this is rude, maybe I'm like doxing Claire, but I'm delighted to see Claire, because I bought your book coincidentally like a few days ago, Claire, at the bookstore. It was fun to see a question from you.
I feel like that's great.
I'm excited to read it.
That's always what we should do, It's good. I think that makes a lot of sense to me. I have a question here that I feel like I never wrote right, because I'm still not going to ask it, because I'm going to read Yvonne's question instead. But I think there's a small thing that happens at the beginning of the book that gets referenced and is very important to how the book ends later. And I had that like, man, this feels. Did Mike know? There's no way he knew when he was writing this that was that. I just felt like, I could sort of feel this, like when it comes up at the end, I was like, that's we're not on radio. That's fucking good. And I was like, I was so impressed. And it did. I'm like, that's one of those opportunities that you found in your own material. I think maybe I'll ask you about later. I don't think I can talk about that being a spoiler. So anyway, let's not talk about that. Let's talk about Yvonne's question. In thinking about community, both of you have been published widely in great lit publications. Can you talk briefly how they help to shape or encourage your writing? How can we help lit journals beyond subscribing? All those are both two great parts of that question.
So I'll start, but I do want to give you time to answer this too, Matt, because I feel like you're better at this than me. So my answer to this is I think I'll give the example of the story that I had in Best American Short Stories. I submitted that to Hobart. I was in grad school at the time. I wrote it in the course of a few days. One of the luckiest things that ever happened to me. I got done with it. I was like, is this anything? I don't know if this is anything. I almost didn't send it anywhere. Talked to Tracy about it, revised it, worked on it, submitted it around, got a few rejections. Eventually, Aaron accepted it. And like the changes that he made weren't gigantic, but they were so important. I can't imagine if it still ended now the way that it does then. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I know it sucked. And I know that I am eternally grateful for like Aaron made my career in many ways by fixing that ending. Truly, I believe this. He gave me so many of the opportunities that I've had. And like we talk every now and then, but I've never really been able to, I think, communicate that to him and thank him for it fully. So I'll keep trying. But I think that is an obvious example, but I also think that lit mags, I mean, I haven't been submitting to lit mags in a long time because I just haven't written short fiction in a long time. But when I was figuring things out, they were targets for me in a way that was invaluable, right? It was like, if I can get in there, then I'll know that I've achieved something and that it is like the people that I respect that are in there, maybe. And that is going to be hugely important for me. So I think that is the big thing. As far as how you can help lit journals beyond subscribing, I think subscribing is the answer. I'm sure there are other answers. It's the number one I would give you. The other thing I would say, and this is not what they want me to tell you, but I will tell you this anyway, like submit really great fiction, right? Like they have, or poetry or whatever, like they have a surfeit of stuff that isn't that great. But if you sent them something that was really good, like, and that was in their slush, they'd be really happy, and they need that. So like, honestly, I think that it's not a popular answer because like slush is so overwhelming that adding to it doesn't sound exciting, but they need great work. They really do.
I think that's a great answer. I was actually thinking something similar while you said it. Like one of the ways you can support lit mags that you like is by like sending them your great work and letting it appear in their pages. I mean, like letting, but it is like, it's a conversation. And I think in some ways that's what I was thinking about, was the conversational aspect of like my life with lit mags, and some places where I had similar editorial experiences as Mike did, where people like really went out of their way to take me seriously and take my work seriously. When I was an editor, I tried to do the same for other people. I know Mike did as well. And I also think like sometimes that conversation extended in the other direction as well. Mike wrote a review of my first short story collection in Puerto del Sol, I don't know, 12 years ago, that while I was writing my first novel when that review came out, and I felt like he had seen my goals really clearly, the things I was trying to do. And he also saw like there's something in that review that's like, I think in the future, Matt Bell might do like these things. And I was like doing them in the novel I was writing. And I was like, oh, well, good. Right. And it gave me this like wild encouragement. And that book probably came out 3 years after I read that. I was still in the midst of it. But I remember feeling really seen by his reading of my book and really understanding. And Puerto del Sol giving that space is something I'll never forget. I think that that helped me write my book that I was writing by the way they reviewed the book before it. That seems really important. I think the other thing you can really do to help lit mags is share the work that appears in them that you like with other people. The hardest part about publishing lit journals is the silence afterwards, which is way bigger than the silence when you publish a book, which is also real. If you read something in a print journal that you love, I mean, share it on the internet, tell people about it, teach it in your classes if you're a teacher, like that's really how you extend the life of those things. So many issues come out and just kind of vanish. And I think like that's really tough on magazines. Thank you, Yvonne. I really appreciate that.
Can I just say, what a wild move on my part to use review time to speculate about what you're going to do in the future. I'm glad you appreciate it. I don't know what the hell I was thinking.
It was super great. And it felt like it was maybe like because of the way lit mags come out like every 6 months, like print magazines. It was like a while after the book came out. So it was like a nice time for it to sort of appear. And I remember that being really great. I mean, I feel like, before you and I knew each other in person, we were in conversation with each other in lit mags too. That's one of the other things I think they really did for me. One of my first internet writing groups with writers Blake Butler and Ryan Call, who I really, that was super important to me. And I met them because we were both all three of us were appearing in the same like tiny, like experimental online magazines. And we just sort of like, oh, like I keep seeing these people in the same places, maybe I'll reach out. And I think there's probably a version of that of how Mike and I know each other as well. I'll say also, Mike, I'm just keep embarrassing you with all your kindnesses toward me, but I remember coming through Iowa City on my book tour for my second book, and I had this great day in Iowa City. That was just like probably the best day on that tour. I was also like really kind of destroyed by being on book tour. I was just really wiped out. I remember you and Tracy having dinner with me and it being like just this like eye of the storm kind of thing that I think a lot. When I think about you, I chase for the heart up. I can see the like restaurant we were in my mind when I think of you two. And I feel like I'm still in that dinner drawing warmth from it. So thank you so much for that.
I always remember that too. Very specific. I know the meal you mean, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really nice sort of thing. I feel like we should just end on me and Mike being like, "You're great, you're great." And I'm like, "We're all great." It does seem nice, and so I'm gonna try to put Mike back in the hot seat one more time to finish up. So when Fat Man and Little Boy came out, you wrote this article for Writer's Digest called 7 Things I've Learned So Far, which included the commandment to embarrass yourself as much as you can. You wrote, when you feel strange about what you're writing, when you worry about what your family will think, when you begin to be just slightly concerned about your future prospects for employment in light of what you've written, that's how you know you're onto something good. Nothing is less interesting than a story designed to imply that the author is a cool, smart, moral person with good ideas and opinions. That feels even more true in sort of today's culture of the way we sort of respond to art sometimes. But if it's not too embarrassing to ask you, I was wondering what, if anything, in drowning practice touched this kind of live wire of shame for you. Was there anything in the book that you were worried about, sharing with others beyond the usual novelistic reticence?
Yeah, there's all sorts of things that I'm sort of doing an inventory right now of like which ones I want to own and which ones I want to leave ambiguous.
Right.
So like whenever the characters are being like monstrously egotistical, there is like the smartest kid in my school thing. I was homeschooled, so I was one of the 3 smartest kids in my school by default. But I absolutely would have believed that sort of shit, right? Like I had those delusions as a kid, and in college I would compare myself to other people. And I don't know what you're doing. Like I'm over here working hard. Like, and it's horrible. Like I feel terrible about it. But like, I mean, I think writing really encourages that sort of, you build up that delusion because you need to in order to survive, right? So like I still have that part of me, even though there's the other part of me over here that's like, you're shit. Right? Like there's that voice and it has control most of the time, but every now and then this guy shows up and I really need him to be there, but I don't feel good about him. This is the one I was really deciding whether I wanted to own it or not. So there is a tiny little subplot about book burning in this book, and I will own here and on the record that I'm a little bit sympathetic to those book burners. There's a part of me that is like, you know what? You go ahead. Like I get it. So let's see if there are any. I think those are the really good ones. And then there's just like I have about 1,000% more scenes where people use the toilet in my fiction than I think the average writer does. And that's just to make sure, keep it spicy.
Yeah, that's what people want. They want toilet scenes,
Yeah,
I feel like this was a good trap. I tried to get out of us just expressing our romance for each other, and instead got you into talking about advocating book burning and toilet scenes.
Matt, I actually want to trap myself a little bit more. I want to make this worse for myself because it's funny to me, because I panicked for a second when you mentioned this, because there is also a piece of advice in there. I don't remember exactly how I phrased it, but it's cultivate rivalries, right? Like try to defeat other people. And Matt, I hope you know, there's a part of me that's thought, I knew you read this. Maybe you always knew. I'm trying to destroy you.
Well, it's good. I mean, I feel like that's the best outcome possible. I mean, you want to be taken down on the field of battle by a better combatant. The worthy death is all I ever wanted from writing novels. So thank you so much, Mike. That is a good place to end. Thank you all so much for being here. Please make some clap icons, make some noise in the chat. Let Mike know you appreciate it. And I'll turn things back over to Javier. Thank you.
That was fantastic. That was a great ending to it as well. You guys were amazing. As always, Matt, you come prepared. We love having you on. And Mike, we hope to have you on again at some point. And good luck with, with this practice and the both of these. Buy them in quantities, get them out to your friends. And we hope to have you guys back at some point. Thanks everyone for tuning in tonight, and get to your computers and start ordering some books. Okay, stick around if you guys just for 1 second after. Thanks so much. Everyone have a good night.